diving deep today into the story of this young Arsenal prospect, Max Dowman.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's talking about this 15-year-old
Right.
who's training with the first team, which is impressive enough on its own.
Yeah.
But then you add in the fact that Arsenal's attack is, well, let's just say it's not looking too good these days.
Yeah, injuries have really hit them hard.
Exactly. A lot of key players are out for the rest of the season.
Mm.
So certainly this kid, Dowman, he's looking like he might actually be their only hope.
Yeah.
So the big question is, could he actually be the answer? Could he really step up?
Well, it's definitely a very interesting situation. It kind of feels like, one of those classic underdog stories.
Right.
Like the young prodigy comes in and saves the day.
Yeah.
But I think if you look closer, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of layers to unpack here.
Okay, so let's unpack it then. We've got Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, right?
Yeah.
And he's out there saying that Dowman's very impressive.
Yeah.
And that some of the things he does in training are unbelievable, which, I mean, that's some high praise.
It is.
But Arteta, he's not really known for, getting carried away with young players, is he?
Not really, no. He's, he's always been pretty careful about what he says.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to younger players.
Yeah.
So when he comes out and makes a statement like that, I think people really notice. And, it's not just about Dowman's talent. I think what's really interesting is that people are talking about his tactical awareness.
Right.
And, his decision-making, all that stuff on the pitch. And those aren't things you usually see from a player his age.
Yeah. So it's not just, some kid with flashy skills. He seems to really, really understand the game.
Exactly.
But, and this is the big but, he's 15.
Yeah.
I mean, there are rules about how young you can be to play in the Premier League, right?
Absolutely. The Premier League has rules, and those rules say very clearly that players who are in the matchday squads, they can't be from an age group lower than the under-16s.
Yeah.
So right now, Dowman's still registered as an under-15 player.
So he can't play.
He can't play. He's ineligible right now.
Okay, so that's a pretty big roadblock.
It is.
So theoretically, I mean, would Arsenal need to, go to the Premier League and ask them to make an exception for Dowman? Could that actually happen?
I mean, it's possible. It's not like it's never happened before.
Yeah.
But it's very, very rare.
Yeah.
And, the Premier League, if they were going to consider it, they'd have to look at a lot of different things.
Like what?
Well, how bad are Arsenal's injuries? How would this impact the whole competition?
Right.
If they make an exception for one player, does that set a precedent? And then, most importantly, they have to consider Dowman himself. They have to make sure they're protecting him. They have to make sure he's not being taken advantage of just because he's so talented.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because, you can't just throw a 15-year-old into that kind of high-pressure environment without thinking about the consequences.
No, absolutely. So it's kind of a delicate situation. I mean, on the one hand, you've got a club and their fans, and they're all desperate for something, anything to turn things around. And then on the other hand, you've got this young player. And, like you said, his whole future is at stake. This decision could really affect his whole career.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine the pressure on this kid?
Oh, my God.
All the media attention, the fans' expectations, the fact that a whole club's hopes are basically resting on his shoulders.
It's huge.
It's massive. And if he's not ready for that, if he's not prepared, it could really backfire.
Yeah, it could be disastrous. Now, I remember Arteta saying something at a press conference a while back. He was talking about how other countries approach youth development and how it's different in England. Could that play a role here, do you think?
It's definitely something to think about. I mean, Arteta's worked in other leagues.
Right.
Where it's totally normal to bring young players into the senior teams much earlier.
Oh, interesting.
In some countries, it's just part of the culture.
Yeah.
But the English system, it's a bit more traditional. They tend to focus on a slower, more gradual kind of development.
So what does all of this mean for Arteta and for Arsenal? It seems like they're in a really tough spot. What are their options?
Well, it's a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? I think it all comes down to one question. Are they willing to take a chance? Are they willing to gamble on Dowman's potential now, even though there are all these risks? Or do they play it safe? Do they protect him and focus on his development in the long term, even if it means, potentially having a rough season this year?
So it's a huge decision.
Yeah.
And not just for Arsenal, but for Dowman too. So let me ask you, the listener, this. What would you do? If you were in Arteta's shoes, what would you do? Would you take the risk? Would you play this 15-year-old prodigy? Or would you play it safe? It's definitely something to think about, and it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on it, and we'll be back to discuss it more as the story develops.